Hi, welcome to our Cybersecurity 101 webinar. This is the first of a three-part webinar series on cybersecurity. The agenda for today is a quick introduction, a presentation on cybersecurity landscape and what's happening in Aotearoa on the threats we have been seeing in our local area, and question and answers at the end. Now, just get started. My name's Andrew. I'm the owner of Aotearoa Technology. Thank you for joining us today. We hope to provide you with some insight on why cybersecurity awareness needs to be your attention now. Aotearoa Technology is a business-to-business computer support company. We specialise in smaller businesses using a suite of security and service programs to help you keep your data and your computer systems safe. We're using a lot more technology than we did 20 years ago, and our technology has access or is holding data involving our bank accounts, personal identification information, and access information. We work hard. We don't want someone else to steal anything from us. And we definitely don't want our customers to be put at risk. If you store any credit card numbers or customer information, you're responsible to protect it from cyber criminals. I imagine you might be thinking if these hackers can get into the big company systems, then what chance do we have to block them? Cybersecurity products are changing rapidly to help efficiently protect and defend systems. Stay tuned for us to tell you more towards the end of the presentation. Today we have James coming on board to talk about cybersecurity threats of the world today. James is from Kaseya, one of our major partners. Now I'll hand over to Jason for an update on what is currently happening in cybersecurity. I'll just stop sharing my screen and share Jason's.
All right, thanks for the introduction, Andrew. So I'm going to jump on a couple of topics here today on behalf of Aotearoa. So like Andrew said, I'm a cybersecurity specialist for our security suite here within the APAC region. Now, what I'm going to speak to today are the 2023 cybersecurity trends, how this is still happening in our environment, and tips to plan to mitigate cyber risk over an extended period of time. So I'll jump on and share my screen, and then I can take us through some slides. Sharing. All right, just can you let me know when you can see my screen, please?
Yeah, all good.
Perfect. All right, so the first topic of conversation is cybersecurity trends in 2023. So things have changed in the industry, to speak. So those things generally fall to the common vulnerabilities, how cybersecurity terrorists and criminals are accessing our data and accessing our environments, the stolen credentials they're using to do so, and the physical access, as well as cloud exposure. Now, 84% of businesses were the victims of successful phishing attempts last year, and there's a 15% increase of that over the year 2020, and it's been increasing ever since. Phishing is the vector for many of today's dangerous cyber threats, like business compromise and ransomware. But unfortunately, many employees don't receive proper training and are more than likely to fall for these phishing attempts as they come through. Now, some stats 1 in 3 employees are likely to click a link in association with a phishing email. 1 in 8 employees are likely to share specific information required within that phishing email. And up to 60% of employees interact with those emails as they come through to their inbox. Now, that's either opening, clicking, forwarding the emails, or replying and submitting with their requests in general. Now, in terms of where cybersecurity is happening, we've seen that organizations carry the heaviest financial burden, and that's more so within that medium range. Now, this is because the larger organizations that are out there, they have processes put in place to protect their environment, and this makes it harder for these criminals to be able to jump in and see what they're doing. So they've been at this a long time. It's the small to medium businesses that are getting hit the most because they haven't had this issue before. Now, risk doesn't just come to the funds taken from a breach itself. It's also the penalties that lie outside of the breach. Businesses can face up to $30 million or 30% of their annual turnover for not putting the right steps in place to keep data breaches from happening. And we know this because we've seen a 13% spike in known data breaches over the last financial year in Australia alone, which is pretty massive. COVID had a lot to play with that as well, with so many people working from home. The next piece I wanted to speak to is how is this still happening, right? So now, why is cybersecurity so attracted to these small and medium businesses? Number one, we have limited resources. SMBs generally have fewer resources and lack security expertise, which leaves them open for more vulnerable cybersecurity events. The defenses are generally weaker. There's a perceived notion that hacking a community that SMBs are relatively weaker in the cybersecurity front compared to large organizations, making them a very attractive target because there's a lot less work that has to go into it to extract that information they require. And that feeds into the cybersecurity awareness. Now, most common downfalls when it comes to cybersecurity breach is human error. And we all know this, right? They should be really the forefront for the security at any given business because they're the ones handling all the sensitive documentation and information, and they need to gatekeep it a bit more closely. Employees that aren't aware of the cybersecurity obligations are likely to ignore the correct procedures, and this can lead to successful attacks. And I'll get into more of this shortly as well. The last piece is valuable data. Even though your business might be small, you have valuable customer data that people are trying to get their hands on. This is financial information or intellectual property that cyber criminals can exploit for financial gain. The top industries that are targeted are generally technology providers, government and multi-capitals, the healthcare industry, professional services, financial institution, and education sectors. And why is this? It's because these separate verticals have one main thing in common, and they generally hold a lot of PII. And that acronym stands for Personal Identifiable Information. This is the kind of information that these cyber criminals tend to hoard on their side and accumulate case files around organizations and businesses so they can kind of connect the dots over time. And when the time is right, they can push through with the plan that they're looking to jump in with. I think this is in the way. Let me get rid of that for you. Now, losing data is much easier than you'd think. So here are some of the top examples, right? We have human error and mistakes. This is the big one. This is probably the biggest one that's facing anyone right now because they're like I said before, they're the main front to the cybersecurity space. System and network configurations or programming errors, natural disasters, hardware and software glitches or failures. Then again, there's insider threats and malware and ransomware viruses. Speaking to the human errors, let's take this example. Let's take this for example. Say we have a new hire and this is Courtney. She's newly graduated. This is her first job in a marketing executive role, and she's really eager to hit those targets and make a name for herself in the industry. During her role, she gets an email from the CEO, Fred, out here, and Fred says, "Hey, Courtney, welcome to the team. I'd just like to task you with a couple of things you can do for me. And then let's shoot back with your mobile number so we can communicate this back and forth so we can make this as streamlined as possible." Courtney, being new to the environment, she says, "Great, fantastic. Here's the number. Let's work together." Who wouldn't, right? Now, this is an example of what that can look like. Once you give the number, it's easy to get caught up in the motion of things. As you can see on the screen in front of you, just during a text conversation, it's quite easy. If the individual being targeted thinks that this is a legitimate business transaction and it's part of her role, there's nothing stopping her from going ahead and just jumping to with enthusiasm and completing what she thinks is the right thing to do. And this is one way of phishing attempts and how they're gauging how they can make more money on this lie as well. Now, it's not what it used to be, right? Historically, phishing scams were easily recognizable due to misspelling, poor grammar, awkward paraphrasing, so forth and so on. Things like ChatGPT and these new AI technology that's coming out, this is affording hackers to get to a level of clarity where it's very difficult for anyone to distinguish left from right. Now, during ChatGPT, it's proficient in generating code, but it's also programmed to generate code that's not malicious, but it's relatively easy to manipulate and put it into the perspective of a potential buyer or a CEO communicating with a third person. There doesn't need to be a specific individual on the other end of this. They can literally set it up with ChatGPT and the AI can do all the talking for them, which is kind of scary if you work in my line of work. And the last piece is tips to mitigate cyber risk. So the first things first, before we get into it, I really think if you're based in Australia, you should familiarize yourself with Essential 8. Essential 8 is a great set of rules that's becoming more and more prevalent. Like 3-4 years ago, I hadn't heard much about it. Now it's massive. Large organizations are requiring their side companies and sister companies to be compliant with these standards. And it's a baseline for what you can achieve with your cybersecurity posture and internal processes with the tools you use and the processes you put in place. Just a quick drink. Now, for these 8 cybersecurity tips, I would recommend highly to perform a security assessment on a regular basis. This is important because things change in the software space, updates come out, new tools go in, old tools get ripped out. And it's important to make sure that your environment is still sitting within an accurate cybersecurity posture. And how you can achieve this is by talking to a local MSP, talking to Altera, and they can easily have a look at your environment and make sure that all the green boxes are ticked and none of the red ones are still active. Number 2 is setting up a secure VPN for remote workers to access applications. Like it says on the screen, the VPN's encrypted internet traffic make it unreadable to anyone intercepting it. It's important to have an easy automated process to set up the VPN for your remote endpoints so that they don't get caught up in any issues. Number 3 is have a bring your own device policy, a policy that specifies security requirements. If they do bring their own device, you need to make sure that they comply with your company's specific policies put in place so you can plan effectively in case of a threat that happens. Number 4, this is coming into that phishing aspect as well, is educating your employees and monitor your exposure on the dark web. I've seen so many stories jumping onto endpoint security, demonstrations and conversations of, we need this because our customer went through this, or we need this because we've just gone through this breach. A lot of this can be avoidable, like massively avoidable, if the end customer put in the right policies in place that said, all right, we're going to protect our information on the dark web to make sure that our credentials aren't being exposed. And we're going to implement phishing and training awareness campaigns in our environment. This is to make sure that our employees are trained to know what to expect if they do get hit by a phishing email, and we can train them on best case scenarios and practices in the future. Number 5 is implement multi-factor authentication. This should be, and single sign-on. This should be relatively self-explanatory. If you have just one password to log into any of your devices, there's nothing stopping anyone else for taking that password that they find on the dark web and doing exactly what you do every single day. Having a secondary login portal where you can clarify who's exactly logging in, yourself or is it someone else, is really important. Most companies have this in place. It's throughout Microsoft. I would highly recommend putting this into action first and foremost. Where are we? Number 6 is create or update your incident response plan. Again, Atera can help you out with this. That's no problem at all. But what would, on your side, do you have a plan set in place that if you did go through an incident, if your information was breached, what's your recovery policy? What's your plan to put in place to get back up and running? Do you have your BCDR or your backup ready to go? If you do get shut down, how long does it take you to get back up and running? What are the steps you have to follow? Who are the numbers that you have to call? So to reduce the amount of risk over time as much as possible. Now, number 7 is deploy antiviruses and anti-malware, especially an endpoint security solution like EDR. This is really important. When it comes to your antivirus, it was all the rage 20 years ago, right? It's fantastic. It does its job. People love it. People need it. You can't live without it. However, when it comes to these new age threats, people started figuring out that, hey, I've had antivirus and I've still got breached. And this is about 75% of all breaches have a pretty solid antivirus in place. Then some smart cookie went along and said, hey, let's create a tool that not only looks for specific executables like viruses and malware, but let's ingest all of the information along the environment and let's threat map it to a certain framework. Now, I won't go into the specifics, but essentially it's covering everything that your antivirus and your anti-malware solutions might miss, which adds to a layered security stack within your environment, which is super important in 2023 today. Outside of that, that's pretty much all I had to cover, but I'll leave you with this. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. I think it's Mike Tyson who can say it better. Put a plan in place so you don't get caught sideways. And I'll throw it back to Andrew. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for that
No
presentation.
problem.
Keep seeing those presentations over the last few years, and you can't listen to them enough. There's always something that you need to keep being aware of, all of the new changes and what's going on. All right, I will go back and share my screen again. And can you see my screen? All right. So now I'm just going to talk a little about what we've actually been seeing locally. It's we keep hearing about everything that happens internationally, but these are things in the last 4 weeks that we've had customers coming into the store quite distressed in some cases with different forms of attacks that they've been occurring. So the first one that we had was a Venus encryption. It encrypted their server, which had all of their documents on it. They did have a backup hard drive, which was plugged into the server, but that was also encrypted by the Venus encryption. There was a request for pay money in Bitcoin, and that they were also told that they had a copy of their data online. For them, they're a little bit lucky. They had a backup that was 3 weeks old, that was in one of the employees' handbag, and we were able to recover the system from 3 weeks old, but they still lost 3 weeks of data, and they also now have to assess their security posture and notify their customers that their data may have been breached and go through I guess it's one thing I don't tend to think about, but it certainly does some business reputational damage when you've got to let your customers know that you're at fault for letting their data out. Then we had another customer. It was also their server, which was for a retail business, and they was a computer that no one used that just backed up all of the data and all of the different, they had got 4 stores, and all of the data went back to the single site. All that data was lost. It cost them about $2,500 just in the point of sale people that sold them the software to try and recreate their data that was held on the individual machines, to try and they'll never get everything back, but enough just to be able to get them up and running. But it did take their business down for quite a few days. So when you've got shops in shopping centres and you're still paying rent and you're trying to do sales on pieces of paper, it's not a good look, and quite stressful. Also, we took up a new client a couple of weeks ago when we went to look through their current standpoint. They believe they had backups, and when we went to check on them, they hadn't been backing up for 18 months, which would have been quite disastrous for them. The reason that they didn't know about it is that Google had made a change to the way that their emails function on the back ends of software, and the alerts that were telling them the backups weren't working or failing. So because no one was doing a physical check, and it was a local backup, no one knew what was going on. So they've moved to an online backup and have a much more stable way of backing up. I guess little horror stories. We've got people coming in with their computers from a mortgage broker, and the staff member had post-it noted the passwords on the stuck to the front of their computer. So if anyone had got their computer, they had gotten into it. So some of the things that you can do around cybersecurity being very simple, from keeping passwords secure. We also had another customer that used the same password for multiple different accounts, and it was the same email that he'd used for his email account, which allowed hackers to get into his emails. They didn't lock him out of his emails, they just sat there and watched it, and they sent out payment update notifications to let everyone know to pay their bills into a new account. They then deleted that from the sent item, so he couldn't see what had happened. His first realization of what was going on was when one of his customers sent him back a receipt saying, "Here, I paid you $2,500, and it had been paid to the wrong account." So we had to go in and restore the security on that account and put in two-factor authentication, and the banks are now trying to get back his $2,500, but it's probably highly unlikely. Again, another lesson learned on password security. This one's not really about a security breach as such. It's about making sure that you have control over all of your technology assets. So we had a customer coming in. He'd had a staff member, a long-term staff member that he'd caught stealing, and he dismissed that staff member, to then find out that she was the one that had set up a lot of his technology solutions, including Google My Business, and he didn't have any access to what was his. Thankfully, in this case, the employee did give back ownership of the account, but it could have been a lot messier, a lot uglier. So just when we do reviews and stuff, we make sure that you are the main one that has access to your own data. So with a lot of those, it's all about passwords. So the question is, do you know if your credentials have been breached for your email address? So there's a popular website that you may or may not have heard about. It's called Have I Been Pawned? There's a QR code there that can take you to the website. All you have to do simply is put in your email address and hit enter, and it will tell you what the results are. So this is my personal email address, and it's telling me that I've had 6 data breaches. And here's the results. The first 2, I had an Adobe account, it was breached. The top one, the web host, was me setting up a small website for my daughter for a school project a long time ago, and that was breached. The anti-public combo list that's probably a mass form of data from other data breaches. So not exactly sure where that one came from. MyFitnessPal was my fitness tracker for a little while, and that was breached. Also MyHeritage, and then another online spam bot. I guess the message with this one is I wasn't contacted about any of those breaches, which is a little bit scary. So I didn't know that had happened at that point in time. It left me at risk. The number one thing that you can do with passwords protection is to use a different password for each account, so that it only affects the one account, rather than what they'll do is, if they've got your email address, they'll go on and they'll try your Netflix, your Microsoft accounts, any other online account they've got, and they'll try those same credentials. They'll also try some variations on different exclamation marks and capitals and so forth to try and get into different accounts. So the big question is, what can I do to protect my business? As was mentioned earlier, we also use the Australian Government Essential 8 guidelines to protect your business. We'll be discussing this in a lot more detail in our next webinar. The basics are to prevent access to your computer system, limit what they can do once they're inside your systems, And if they do ransomware your systems, make sure you've got a way to be able to get in, restore your systems quickly. One of the backup systems that we recommend, you should be able to restart your system within about 10 minutes and be up and running as if nothing had happened, which is very, very good. But most people can't do that. And so the next thing is sign up for webinar 2, which would be is about 4 weeks' time. Also book a free consultation, which we're offering today for anyone that's online or listens to the webinar later on. And we also have some time for some questions and answers if anyone has anything. I'm just going to put the offer up on the screen. That's pretty much it for today. I'd like to thank Jason again for coming on board. It's great to have him as a speaker and just to be able to give some external advice to our customers. So thank you very much. And unless Jason wanted to say something.
No problem at all, mate. Just saying, happy to be here.
No worries, thank you. I think that will be the end of the webinar.
All right, well, cheers, guys. Everyone enjoy the rest of your day, all right?
You too.
Thanks, team.
Bye.
Bye.